Welcome to AW Services, another video, something different. This video is now showcasing the Gotek USB Floppy Drive Emulator. This one here I'm installing into the Akai S2000 digital sampler from many years ago. With the samplers, they had a standard floppy drive, but with modern day technology and the ability to go digital, you can now use the emulator. It's a Gotek design, made in the UK, and this then has a USB drive as opposed to all your floppy disks that you need to create samples and to use your sample libraries. I purchased this one from CPMAGNETICMEDIA. I believe the chap's called Chris. I found this one recommended through a few videos on YouTube, and I got it from eBay, and very quick. One of the best eBay deliveries I've had. It just goes to show that someone has pride in their product and their postage. It was Royal Mail special delivery, very quick, very happy with that. So in this video I'm going to attempt to fit it into my machine. I haven't seen any other videos of anyone fitting them, so you know, this was probably made, the S2000 I believe was around 1993, 94, I may be wrong, but in the 90s. So a lot of youngsters would go, "Cool, that's an antique." Yes, it is. There are many people still buying these and mopping up Facebook Marketplace of old hardware style samplers because they give that very realistic feel and approach to music creating samples, creating mixes. This has time stretch, a lot more technology in this than the new Roland SP404 Mark II that's not even been released yet because they messed that up. But we're going to focus on the Akai S2000. So very good informative instructions included, some very good safety warnings in red and things to be very mindful of when installing this. So let's go ahead. First of all, the boring safety talk. The machine has been unplugged, and the machine has been unplugged all night, so there shouldn't be any residual current or charge in any of the capacitors or components that are maybe working near. So to get into the machine, you've got case screws on the side. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get myself my peanut butter jar lid that I use for my electronics for storage of screws. So let's get these out. There's 5 in total, 2 in each side and 1 on the rear of the machine. I am familiar with the inside of the machine because when I got it, I took it apart and I cleaned it. I used a very soft paintbrush along with a vacuum cleaner on a hose and took out any residual dust, because that dust can heat up and cause the machine to overheat. It's not fan cooled, plenty of case ventilation, and I've also cleaned all of the case as well, degreased it and tried to get the colour back because it should have been a whitey beige colour when new. So take the lid off, put that to one side. This is the inside of the S2000 machine. Be very mindful of the main power supply board, that main capacitor, that sometimes still can have a residual charge in there. So to get the original floppy drive out, there are 4 screws holding this carriage assembly into the base of the machine. But before we do that, we're going to need to very carefully cut some cable ties, so bear with me. Very unorganised. I'm back. A very important quick note is this Gotek device comes with a SanDisk, very small thumbnail USB drive. I followed the instructions as per written, and I'm now backing up that thumb drive with its 3019 files onto a separate thumb drive as a separate backup. If you lose that, you lose the brain of the whole operation basically. So This is the floppy drive inside. This is the ribbon cable and the power supply to the floppy drive. So we need to very carefully cut the cable tie. You also need to be very gentle. A lot of this technology is over 30 years old. The cables have been in that position all of their life since they were built, so they could be very fragile. We are dealing here with an antique, so be very mindful. Okay, so on the ribbon cable, we need to get a knife and we need to very carefully cut the reinforced tape. Cutting the tape isn't an issue, but if you use your machine in a mobile application and it's in a flight case and you're using this to power your keyboards, for example, you may be in a band, you may have a Roland W30, a Yamaha DX7 for example, it may be worthwhile to put a very quick little blob of hot glue on this plug once it's in place to stop any vibration or rattle. So we need to carefully peel up this tape, being very careful not to put your hand on the power supply board because you might get a little tickle. "30-year-old tape is like concrete." It's best to unplug the ribbon cable and power supply cable first, because once you undo the carriage of the floppy drive, you don't want it hanging on the cable and putting undue stress on there. So these ribbon cables, I'm filming it also because it's good for reference and return placement of parts. So we know that when I return the ribbon cable comes away from the board and we have its correct orientation. So with these, there are no locks on them, so I'm going to use a very small flathead screwdriver just to give me a bit of purchase and lift and pull straight out. Being careful not to bend any of the pins or to strain the ribbon cable itself. We need to do our power cable out, which is a 5-volt power supply, and this is a lift up tab on this one. So with a small screwdriver again into the front face of the power supply plug, gently tease to release the clip, and the cable comes away. So that is now the cabling released. Turn the machine onto its side, not onto its front face, because you can damage your control surfaces. And we have 4 screws on the bottom to remove. This one, this one, this one, and this one. We also need to be mindful to keep these screws separate away from our case screws because they are a different size. I'll put those in my toolbox lid. While reaching inside of the machine, we then support and hold our floppy drive carriage. Four screws, much smaller than the case screws. Gently pulling our machine flat. And you can see the difference in colour from the environment getting into the case. I did think I cleaned it pretty well. So that is now our floppy drive removed. And then on the Gotek, we are going to need to reuse this ribbon cable. It's always good to keep your drive, once you've taken it out, give it a dust off, put it inside put it in some cling film, wrap it up to avoid any moisture, and then put it in a box and keep that out of the way and keep hold of it, because you never know, you might need it one day. Or if you ever sell your machine and your Gotek device is compatible with another machine, maybe an S01, 3000 XL, etc., then you can keep that and reuse it So 30-year-old tape, being very careful not to strain the ribbon cable. We need to reuse and recycle this ribbon cable plug. It does have a keyway and it is notched, and it is identical on both sides. So we'll put that to one side a second. We also need to reuse and recycle our power plug. Put that old floppy drive to one side. So with the orientation of the Gotek device, our power supply plug, which we've taken off of our floppy drive, which was on in this orientation, was only using, as it's an identical like for like, 5 volts and ground. So we can put this onto our new Gotek device. It only has 2 pins. So we need to ensure that we're only using 5 volts. It will only go on one way, like so, and we are only using 5 volts and ground. We also need to be very mindful that this is a keyed plug, and we need to ensure that the plug goes back on the board in the correct polarity, because we could damage this device. Now, following the instructions provided, we do need to just double check, because it's precautionary, but also you could invalidate your warranty on your Gotek device if it all goes wrong and you've got more than 5 volts at present. With our multimeter, and very carefully plugging our S2000 back in, turning our machine on, and then with our meter we know that our plug goes that way, so 5 volts should be very careful when reaching into the machine that we have 5 volts on our pins. Turn the machine off, unplug the machine, and be very mindful now that we have energized the capacitor in the main power supply board, so be careful not to touch your fingers on that or anywhere near that. So our Gotek device, as we can see on the front of the machine while rotating, I've also cleaned my faceplate, so you need to be very careful of that. So our Gotek device sits within the galvanized steel chassis provided with the original floppy. So looking at a like for like orientation, we need to take out another 4 screws, which are the 4 screws here, here, here and here. Ba, 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 ba. My USB stick is still backing up, So we now remove the carriage from our original floppy, making note of its orientation and screw replacement. Then the Gotek device sits back in and the holes line up with the holes in the carriage plate. The screws that we have removed are small these are proper machine screws. We now need to use the screws provided in the packet with the new emulator, which are self-tapping screws. Keep hold of the screws that you have removed, replace them in a bag and put those back into the old floppy drive for storage. This bag does come supplied with 2 jumpers, PCB jumpers, so be careful not to lose those or misplace them. And now with our new screws and our Gotek device, we line it up carefully. It is only plastic, so be careful not to over tighten it or you will crack the plastic enclosure for the emulator device. And you've got to literally just pinch them up. It's a very lightweight piece of equipment, so it's not going to fall apart, it's not going to rattle. You don't need Loctite, you don't need super glue. All you need is a little bit of common sense, some patience and a steady hand. You may have bought one of these samplers for the first time. You might not be someone that's very good with electronics or very good with tools, so you need to make sure that you have the correct tools for the job, or a near match of tools for the job. Our emulator is now mounted within the original galvanized steel enclosure. We need to put the device in through the back of the machine, and then it appears through the faceplate of the machine. I've gone for the beige colour, which actually, looking at the way the machine has aged, it's I would say a near identical match. Tilting the machine up on its end while gently holding on to the device, remembering that our screws for our carriage for our floppy were the smaller screws. It's then a case of lining up the holes, ensuring that the device is poking through. Haven't got to do them up super tight, you just need to locate them first. But with the device in the aperture of the faceplate, it lines up nicely. Steady hand, bit of patience. Also, we need to be very careful not to cross thread the screws. That's our 4 screws now back in the main chassis of the machine. Our Gotek emulator is now in its new home position. ribbon cable that we took out of our previous unit was in this orientation where the cable folded over the machine, and it was tape. You can still see the pattern. So we need to make sure that that ribbon cable goes back in this orientation. Cable side up onto the emulator. I'm using a magnifying glass to ensure that all of my pin placements within the ribbon cable are in the correct placement. Lining up the ribbon cable into the main chassis PCB of the sampler, and gently just press down. Don't push too hard because you will crack the PCB and its tracks. Our main power supply plug, which has the locking tab faced into the machine, and that goes in this orientation. And that locks in place. That ribbon cable can be secured if need be. This is proper British Army grade gaffer tape. It sticks like poo to a blanket, unlike some of the cheap stuff that you can buy. And that will just prevent the machine from rattling around and the cable slackening off. Our new device is installed. It is working, it does illuminate, and it also has an electronic click to replicate the floppy drive arm, similar to a hard drive. So that's in place, that's working, and that's secure. Continue to unplug the machine again, and we're now reverse and place back on our lid. If you haven't already cleaned your machine, you can get a duster and you can clean the lid down with a dry cloth. I have actually washed mine and degreased it. The case with these ears here, these are the ears that go behind the 19-inch rack mount ears, like so. You need to be very careful that on the side of the machine you've got grounding tabs, and these springs create a chassis ground to case. Also eliminates hum. Our screw holes line up, and we now continue to replace the screws into the side of the machine. Two at each side, and remembering the small screw at the back. And that is the complete installation of the floppy USB emulator from CPMAGNETICMEDIA. If you have any questions on the video, feel free to comment. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up and a like. And if you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe and help my channel grow and I may be able to give more varying content. Thank you very much.